What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Paper Yugioh, and today I've got a very chill deck profile for you. We're going to be going into my GOAT format deck profile. GOAT format was the format from 2005. The game was still pretty simple, but it was becoming complex. It was starting to develop as a skillful game. I always say if you're learning the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, this is a really good place to start because it's a lot simpler than Yu-Gi-Oh today, but it still has the depth that you need to really understand the game. I'm not going to make this too long-winded. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. I just want to say real quick, thank you so much for helping me reach 700 subscribers. That is a huge milestone for me. Let's get this channel up to 1,000 subscribers as soon as we can. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment on what other changes you would make in the deck. So I'm starting off with 2 Magician of Faith. This card is going to replace itself by adding back one of your spells from the graveyard when it's flipped. Really powerful card. It can add back like your Pot of Greeds and your Graceful Charities and your Delinquent Duos. So you always want to play 2 of this. My friend Eric plays 1 because he's nuts, but we won't talk about that. He still beats me every time. Then we got 2 Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi is a Book of Moon on legs, which means that on summon, it's going to be able to flip a monster to face down defense position. It has 1,100 attack, which is pretty significant because most of the things that you're going to be flipping with this have like 1,000 defense. So when it's flipped to face down defense position, this can actually ram right into it. And then since it's a spirit monster, it actually comes back to your hand at the end of the turn. So it protects itself in that way. 2 Tsukiyomi, I would never change that. Then we've got the 1 Sangan. Sangan is like my favorite card in the deck just because it adds your snake, which we'll get into in a second. But when it's sent to the graveyard, you can basically just add a lot of your powerful monsters from your deck to your hand, so it replaces itself. Again, in GOAT format, replacing itself as a card is going to be very strong because you always want to make sure you have cards to make plays, just like in Yu-Gi-Oh today. Next, we got Breaker the Magical Warrior. Breaker is an amazing card. It's an MST on legs. It gains a counter, and then in GO format, you have what's called turn player priority. So when it gains its counter, you have the choice, in other words, to pop a spell or trap on their side of the field before your opponent can even react to this card. Then if you don't use the effect to pop, the counter gives it an extra 300 points. So it's a 1,900 beater. 1,900 is a really significant benchmark in GO format. It can beat over a lot of things. Snake, this is your infinite discard fodder. So for your cards like Tribe Infecting Virus, when you need to pitch a card to blow up your opponent's board, you're going to be able to add this card back in the standby phase, which is extremely powerful because it's just recursive, infinite discard fodder. So you really need this card in your deck, and you want to search it out with Sangan as soon as possible because if you get hit with a Delinquent Duo, you're always going to want to put this card in the graveyard so you're not negging so much. Here's Tribe Infecting Virus. This card is kind of like your Raigeki. You're just going to discard a card and you're going to call out a type, and then you're going to destroy all monsters on the field of that type. Just be careful because it also destroys your monsters as well. So if you call Aqua, it's going to destroy this card plus all your opponent's Aquas. But it's a great BLS out. It's a great Chaos Sork out. Definitely need to have this card on the deck. Now we have DD Warrior Lady, another out to like problem cards because you can pretty much just ram into something and then you can banish both it and the card that it rammed into, or the same thing will happen if it's attacked. Sometimes you don't use the effect. Like if this card could easily beat over a monster and it's not like a Sangan or something that is going to be hurtful in the graveyard, you can kind of just attack over it. It's 1,500, so it's pretty beefy. This is a really nice, just like mid-game card to get rid of things. This is Magical Merchant. I have it in Korean. If I'm not mistaken, it's Korean. Please correct me if I'm wrong. That's what it said on the eBay listing. This card's really cool because it replaces itself. When it's flipped, you actually mill cards to the graveyard until you get a spell or trap, and then you can add that card to your hand. Which is cool because you're going to be milling a lot of your lights and darks to make your BLS plays and your Chaos Sork plays. The only thing is, if you mill a BLS or a Chaos Sork, it's gone. You cannot bring that card back because it was not properly summoned. So I like it because it replaces itself and it also gets a spell or trap, and the spells and traps in this game are super powerful. So this is where the deck starts to deviate from normal GOAT control. These are kind of like my nuance cards, my niche cards that I really like to play personally. Do I have a really high win rate? Not really, but I'd like to have fun with this game because it's not super competitive for me. We've got a Spirit Reaper. Spirit Reaper is also one of my favorite cards. It can't be destroyed by battle. Conversely, when it's targeted, it dies immediately. If this card attacks your opponent directly and inflicts damage, you get to rip a card out of their hand, which is like super powerful. Causing your opponent to neg cards is just ridiculous. Summon this to an open field and attack, and your opponent's like, oh God, what do? I have to discard like my most important card that I needed for next turn. I will never get rid of Spirit Reaper. I love this card. Moving on, we have Blade Knight. So you won't see Blade Knight in all decks. Having said that, in a Warrior Toolbox deck, this is a guarantee. I like to play it because it has a really cool effect where if it attacks into a flip monster, its effects are going to be negated. So if your opponent tries to set that sneaky moth to add back a Pot of Greed or something, You just Blade Knight into it, and it's not going to get its effect. So Blade Knight's really cool. Also, it can gain attack if your hand size is small enough. So it'll gain 400, and it'll go to 2K. Which could rip over like a BLS with a counter on it. So Blade Knight's really cool. Asura Priest is really nice. It's a spirit monster, just like Tsukiyomi, so it'll come back to your hand at the end of the turn. Also, it can attack every monster your opponent controls once. So let's say your opponent flips like a really annoying scapegoat, you could just go attack, 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 and then their whole board is cleared. And then again, it comes back to your hand, so it protects itself. 1700's beefy. I like Asura Priest. It's not played in all variants of GOAT, but I like it. This card is kind of new. I have not played Injection Fairy Lily in the past, but my friend Eric gave me this card, and ever since then I've been like, wow, this card is awesome. It's not that strong. It's a 400, 1500. However, it has an effect where you can pay 2,000 life points and it'll gain 3,000 attack in the damage calculation. So what does that mean? At 3,400, this card can beat over BLS. So this card is a normal summon BLS out, which is amazing. Not to mention, it doesn't have to attack a monster, so you can literally just rip into your opponent for 3,400 in endgame and just end the game right there. I'm never gonna get rid of this card again. This card is wonderful. This card is Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer. As you can see, it's a hobby league. I don't know if you can see it based on the light, but hobby league cards are not legal in sanctioned GOAT format tournaments. However, I only play casually, so I like to keep the shiny cool card in my deck. This is like one of the only ones I have that's like of higher rarity. So Kaiku's really cool. It rips your opponent's graveyard. It takes their lights and darks out when it attacks, so they can't make plays like BLS, for example, or they can't make Chaos Sork plays. So it's really good at controlling their graveyard. Also, it's incredibly strong. It's at 1,800. The one thing is, its defense is incredibly low. It's 700. So this is an example of a card that when your opponent normal summons a Tsukiyomi, it's just going to rip right over this. It's very strong. I would not get rid of this card. I see it being played more and more in GOAT decks, so I think it's really good. Now we're going to get into the boss monsters. I've got one Chaos Sork and one BLS. They essentially do the same thing. BLS is a lot stronger, but they're used for banishing cards on your opponent's side of the field. BLS can banish any card, or any monster, and Chaos Sork, the monster that it banishes, has to be face up. BLS has the added bonus where it's 3K instead of the 2,300 of Chaos Sork. And also, if it destroys a monster by battle, it can attack again. So sometimes you're just attacking over your opponent's last monster and then swinging in for 3,000 for game. I will say, once we get into the spells, you're going to see this, but these are cards that you really want to save until you know that your opponent has used all of their really powerful spells like Snatch Steal. Because if your opponent takes this from you, it is devastating. It is super devastating because you usually use this as like an endgame play. I try not to summon this unless my opponent has like 0 resources and they need to top deck a Snatch Steal, or they've already used it, or I'm just ending the game. So that's when I would use this card. And for the traps, I've got Call the Haunted, which is basically your monster reborn as a trap. It's really good. Like when your opponent declares an attack, you can bring back a Sangan and you can replace itself. So Call the Haunted, really nice. TT is really nice, Torrential Tribute, because basically you're just gonna catch your opponent off guard a lot, or you can just normal summon something and flip this and peg a whole board. So that's really nice. This is another staple, you have to play it. Ring of Destruction. This card ends games too, because more often than not, you're going to use this just to end a game when they have a BLS on the board or something like that. You're going to flip this. Sometimes this card allows you to end the game in a draw, which is kind of interesting. But top decking this card late game can be really devastating. So you really always want to have Ring. This is the fun card, Mirror Force, if you remember this from back in the day. Really strong card. It can blow up your opponent's entire board if they're not skillful about it. You play around this card by, if you have multiple monsters, you definitely want to put at least one of them in defense mode before attacking because you want to save it. But this card can really change the tide of a game. It's a really great card. Dust Tornado. Spell and trap removal is important in this game because if they have, for example, a Premature Burial, or if they have a Snatch Steal, you're going to want to get rid of that as soon as possible. Dust Tornado is a really good card for doing that. It also allows you to set a spell or trap from your hand when it resolves. So really good card. You need to play one at least, I believe. I've seen some people play 2, but you also play the MST, so you might not need to. I play the 3-trap Dust Shoot. I think ripping your opponent's hand is a really powerful mechanism in GOAT format. And Trap Dust Shoot allows you to do just that. As long as your opponent has 4 or more cards in their hand, you could just flip this and you're gonna rip a monster out of their hand. And you get hand knowledge, right? So you, by seeing their hand, you know how you can play your hand more optimally. I would recommend this card at least in the side. I play it in the main because I think it's really cute and funny. And that's it for the traps. So let's move on to the spells. So first we've got the Trinity. We've got Delinquent Duo, which is used to rip 2 cards out of your opponent's hand at the measly cost of 1,000 life points. This is a card that I add back a lot with Moth. Sometimes I'll just be like, Delinquent, flip Moth, Delinquent. You just lost 4 cards. And now my Moth is just gonna, you know, become a Thousand Eyes or whatever. Really good card. You have to play this card. This is like it's part of the Trinity. You need to play it. Next card in the Trinity, Graceful Charity. Amazing card. Imagine if Graceful Charity was in the game today and you could just draw 3 Pitch Merly Hovness. Oh my God, dude, that would be insane. I like to try to save this card until I have my Sinister Serpent, because I know that at least one of the 2 cards that I'm discarding is going to come back. So you're really plussing 3 cards off of this card. Just an amazingly powerful card. You don't play GOAT format without this. And then also we have the Pot of Greed. Very simple. Everyone knows what it does. Draw 2 cards from your deck. One of the simplest texts in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just cool to be able to play in a format where you're able to play Pot of Greed, right? Because this card is never coming back because we have our pot variants now. You are absolutely playing the Trinity if you are playing GOAT format. Another card that's necessary is Nobleman of Crossout. It was at 2 back then. A lot of people, actually, I don't know if anyone ever played 1. It's super powerful. This is basically going to be your out to your opponent's face down monsters, which we know are some of the most powerful monsters in the game of GOAT. They just activate this, you can banish their monster and all other copies of it from their deck. The downside is you also have to banish any copies of that card from your own deck. But one of the cool things is you get to look through your opponent's deck to verify. So you get a lot of deck knowledge as well. You can tell right off the rip what deck they're playing. So really good card. You have to play this at 2, I think. Metamorphosis. I play at 2. I want to bump this up to 3 because you get a lot of clean wins with this. You're going to see in my extra deck, I only play the Thousand Eyes because I just play casually, but I'm going to leave in the description a bunch of other extra deck monsters that you could play in tandem with this card. This card is insane. Like you can activate this on a Sangan to bring out something from your extra deck, and then you get Sangan effect, and like it goes into your Thousand Eyes, which can slow the game down, which it's basically like the old school Mystic Mine, if you think about it that way. So meta is good. I would play it at 3 because I just want to see this. Got a Scapegoat. I've seen this card played at 2. I don't know if I would ever play it at 3, but I probably should bump this up to 2 because it's just a really nice defensive card. Like late game, if you need resources and you don't have anything, you can just stall with this sometimes. And of course, they're level 1 tokens, so you can activate meta on it and it'll bring out your Thousand Eyes Restrict. So really good card for defensive purposes. If you're thinking about setting this card into a board where your opponent has back row, and you're not summoning a monster that turn, sometimes you're just activating this and getting your 4 tokens. So really cool card. Next, Book of Moon. Tsukiyomi without legs. You can use this defensively. If your opponent is targeting your monster, you can flip it down. If your opponent activates a Mirror Force, you can chain a Book of Moon and flip your own monster down. Or you can do what's called the Suk knock or the Book knock, which is basically you Book of Moon someone and then you Nobleman across out them. So really great card. A lot of people might be going away from this card because it's technically not a plus unless it's in tandem with something else. But I just like it as like a trap or like, you know, to use it aggressively late game. So good card. Snatch Steal. Snatch Steal super important. When my opponent plays that BLS too early, if they're a scrub, I'm going to take it. It's good. I mean, all the monsters in this game are really good to take. It's also pretty good with Book of Moon because essentially I could take your monster and then I can book it. So that way this will fall off, but I'll get to keep the monster permanently. And now you have no way of taking it back unless you have a Snatch Steal. So Snatch Steal, Book of Moon, really cool play. You need to play Snatch. It's one of the staples. Premature Burial. It's your monster reborn of the deck. This card is like Giga Ban now because you can do some crazy loops with it. But at the cost of 800, you bring back a monster from your grave. Again, you could book your monster and this will fall off. So it'll prevent your opponent from destroying this and it going to the graveyard. Premature Burial, need to play it. Heavy Storm. Man, we've got new Heavy Storm cards in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, like Lightning Storm or Harpy's Feather Duster, but this one blows up spells and traps on both sides of the board. Be very careful setting spells and traps into an open field if your opponent has a lot of cards in hand, because if one of them is Heavy Storm, you just lost the game. It's over. So until you see this card in the graveyard, you do not want to commit that much to your back row. Take it from me. Lightning Vortex. Lightning Vortex is basically a Raigeki if you have the Sinister Serpent, because it's an unlimited discard fodder. You just pitch one, blow up your opponent's board. It's really good. It's not played in every single GOAT deck. I really like to play it because I like to have BLS outs and Chaos Stork outs, because late game, if you're top decking and you're against a BLS, like, it could be really hard to out. So Lightning Vortex is cool. Again, having the Sinister Engrave really helps this card a lot, so I'll always play this. Finally, we got the MST. Very simple. Destroy a spell and trap on the field. You're basically never destroying your own spells or traps, I wouldn't think, but it's really good just for like picking off back row. I think most skillful players will save this card until they have to pop like a Snatch Steal or until they have to pop a Preemie. Those cards are game enders, so you really want to hold on to this and every card in your deck for as long as you possibly can. It's definitely a chess match. And now onto the extra deck. I really just play the 1000 Eyes, but again, I'm going to link a bunch of other monsters you can play in your extra deck. Again, I play casually, so me and my opponent just share extra decks, but there's a ton of good ones like Dark Balter the Terrible. There's a ton of really good ones that all have their applications in the game. You also want to have a pretty extensive extra deck just in case you Snatch Steal something from your opponent and then you can meta it into something cooler. I will, again, list those down in the description box down below. So guys, that is it for the deck profile. Thank you so much for being here. If you stayed till the end, I appreciate you. Please leave a like. Comment down below what other changes you would make to the deck. What kind of cards are you playing that I'm not? And what suggestions do you have for me going forward? Other than that, my name is Paper Yugioh. Thank you so much for being on the channel. I will see you in the next one. Peace.